Mortis would be the first god to fall, the ancient Zudolariere II. There would be more, many, many more. The epoch of heathens would be a time of relative peace for Nevender. But across the celestial plains, fear and panic would spread. The Liberator was coming for the immortals, and she would have her victory. But that is a tale for another time. Years pass. Nevender is slow to change, but you are patient. And through that patience you would come to see a new world born. From the southern wastes to the tips of the northern ranges, there was not a realm unaffected by your rule. Guarding the Nexus proved a daunting task, though a necessary one. Its power remained in your hands, and with it, you controlled the world. Any who opposed you would soon learn that Ilion was both a home and a monolith casting its shadow across the land. Sinking the Nexus guaranteed the obsession with its power would wane. With the elves fought back from the Lows and the Second Woken pushed from the Castle Hale, the bastions of the old empire rose again. Although the Castle Hale was easily rebuilt after its invasion, the Lows would not be so lucky. The lives lost coming to the Hale's aid were too many. The Lows was abandoned, its few survivors taking up an Ilion, with you. The Lows was abandoned, its few survivors presumably dead, or worse. Though you preferred to be called Avi, the people of this new empire insisted on calling you Empress. Reintegration of the Vale's many troops took years, and it was not without pain. But as the last of the Titans died, so too did the nightmare they wrought. You sent troops of Second Woken hordes to Greyleaf to guard the throne of Corsal. Should any god choose to stand against you, the throne would be their prison. The same became true of the Hall of Souls. Its bricks grew full of those mortals foolish enough to question you. Supplanting the Council of Six as leader of the Second Woken was a difficult choice, but one you would honor. Ghouls from Greyleaf to Queen's Nest flocked to you, and you were happy to meet them. With their necromancers, you rose the corpse of the Beast of Galleon from its decomposed state, preferring to ride it as your trusty steed. In Greyleaf, you saw to the dismantling of the throne of Corsal and the Hall of Souls. Without these beacons of death, and tended to by druids, the forests of the lost bloomed again. A shame, then, that the undead so loathed you. Would but Ilion's walls fall, the mortals there would make a delectable target. However, without the meddling of their dread queen, many of the rotting Second Woken ambled aimlessly across the land. Without an alliance, the demons slowly hid from the world. The fires of Barrett-Nor died, and the celebrations of Hurek quieted. In some parts of Nevendar, the existence of demons became myth. Though, not everything in the unholy realms was so grim. The Festival of the Molten Moons raged on in Hurek, an eternal celebration held in your honor. As for the Legion, they came to accept your rule over the path of flesh and flame. They marched to Ilion seeking a permanent alliance. You were happy to accept. They marched to Ilion seeking a permanent alliance, though surely they knew you'd reject the offer. As for the Legion, they expelled all traces of the Empire from the path of flesh and flame, barring entry even to you. Still, Hurek happily accepted you as their champion. Even Hurek named a new champion. As for the Legion, they came to accept that mortals ruled the path of flesh and flame, and marched to Ilion seeking a more permanent alliance. It was an alliance you flatly refused. It was one you accepted. It would only be a matter of time before you set sail aboard the Helzadin with your demon kin, the weapon of Barrett-Nor loaded, ready to kill their lord Bethrazen. Elsewhere, the elves grew reclusive, abandoning Atelian and drawing themselves away into the mountains of the Whitelands and Wotan's grave. Though formally at war, it would be years before you'd see an elf again. Elsewhere, the elven clans ceased their raids and took their place as allies of Ilion, governing the Whitelands and Wotan's grave from their true home in Atelian. So honored were you among their people, even the blood trees bowed to you in respect. So went the races of the world, but in the end, it was the intimate moments that mattered most. Though Bagthal continued to fight proudly in your honor, the ghosts of his past haunted him. He would rise at night screaming her name. Sometimes you could swear you'd hear her answer. Bagthal grew comfortable in Ilion over the years, or rather, as comfortable as Bagthal could grow. Somewhat remarkably, even he and Orion became friends. After Bagthal passed, you ordered a single soldier to stand guard over his grave. Not to guard it, but so that he wouldn't be alone. Coruscant visited Port Grimard often, and you were happy to make the pilgrimage. She never assumed the name Beth, but she honored her family's memory in her own way. Coruscant happily assumed the role of High Priestess. She held Mass in Ilion, praying for every race, even those least deserving of it. You thought of Coruscant often, even resorting to prayer so that you might hear her voice again. She never answered. It would be a lie to say that Charlea forgave herself for her actions in Queen's Nest all those years ago. But there were times when you could make her happy, and she could forget long enough to enjoy that. Though most in Ilion rightly feared Charlea, you grew to see her in a different light over the years. Unless, that is, you walked in on her during a feed. After everything you'd been through, you still think back to Charlea and wonder if there was more you could have done for her. Sadly, the fate hand would prove the answer to be no. There were many ways to avoid death on Nevendar, but none so reliable as having a friendship with Edgemar the Crow. There were many times he'd find himself in a position to save you from the brink, and he did. Edgemar's life in the crypts of Ilion was a happy one, though occasionally one revived monstrosity or another would break loose. He kept life and death interesting. The crypts of Ilion weren't the same without Edgemar in them, though there were times you could swear you'd feel his ghost lurking there. Melindrak grew old, as did his cubs. Soon they had cubs of their own. It was not the caretaker's life he'd hoped for, but it was life just the same. To your surprise, Melindrak grew to prefer his time in Ilion's gardens to his home in the forests. He never slept indoors, but then, old habits are what they are. Melindrak's remains, as per his request, were fed to a specific sapling in the gardens of Ilion. One day he will be reborn as a blood tree, a fine end for a fine druid. Together, you and Orion traveled to the Lows often, every occasion fountaining into a celebration of drink, dancing, and laughter. Orion traveled home often, and though his family asked after you, you never returned. Years would pass with Sebastian, the rightful king of the Hale, as your dear friend and mentor. When he finally breathed his last breath, it was a peaceful one, with you by his side. Though Sebastian didn't survive your rise to power, it would have been impossible without him. His legacy, then, lived on through you. Though her mortality always haunted her, Elmiran felt safe with you, as did her falcons. They made a strange family, but what family isn't strange, really? Elmiran's remains were eventually moved to Ilion. Though you told no one and she had no funeral, somehow her falcons found her. They sit at her crypt to this very day, as though waiting for her to rise. Ormariel's life would always be full, and the people who needed her always demanded more. But Ilion was her home, and she longed to return every time she was away. Remembering Ormariel was an altogether harder experience, and one you'd rather avoid. It would be a long reign over Ilion and, eventually, Nevendar. There would be more loss and more loves along the way. But your life would be full. The people of Ilion would be safe. And until the epoch's end, Nevendar would be liberated.